She was forced to sit alone at her ex's wedding until Mountain Man said, "Act like you're with me." She never expected to feel invisible, heartbroken, and completely out of place on what should have been a joyful day. But then he appeared, tall, rugged, and unshakably kind, and suddenly the world seemed to notice her again. As laughter replaces her fear and sparks of connection ignite, she begins to wonder, could this stranger hold the chance to heal her heart? Yet beneath the smiles, a secret looms. He's leaving town soon, and her ex is watching, ready to remind her of the past she thought she'd left behind. Can she risk opening her heart again, or will this fleeting chance slip away forever? Clara stared at the cream-colored envelope on her kitchen counter, her hand trembling slightly as she traced the gold-embossed lettering with her fingertip. The morning sunlight streaming through her kitchen window caught the metallic shine of Ryan Matthews's name, making it seem to mock her. She hadn't expected to receive a wedding invitation from her ex-fiancé, especially not one so elaborate. She took a deep breath, inhaling the comforting scent of her morning coffee. The small kitchen in her modest house felt suddenly too quiet, too empty. Outside, through the window, she could see Mrs. Peterson walking her golden retriever past the white picket fence, another ordinary morning in their little town of Milton Springs. "Get it together, Clara," she whispered to herself, pushing her reading glasses up her nose. Working as the town's school librarian meant she knew practically everyone, and news of Ryan's invitation would spread fast. She could already imagine the whispers in the grocery store aisles and the sympathetic looks at church. Her phone buzzed, making her jump. Margaret's name flashed across the screen, and Clara felt a rush of relief. "You'll never believe what just came in the mail," Clara said, answering the call. "Let me guess. A certain fancy invitation?" Margaret's warm voice held a note of concern. "Susan from the post office mentioned something about it." Clara sank into her kitchen chair. "News travels fast. Honey, this is Milton Springs. The mail truck sneezes, and everyone knows about it by lunch." Margaret paused. "How are you holding up?" Clara's voice caught. She watched a pair of chickadees at her bird feeder, thinking about how simple their lives must be. "I don't know, Margaret. Seeing his name again, it just brings everything back." "Of course it does. That man did a number on you." Clara fingered the invitation's thick paper. "The wedding's at the Grand Lake Hotel. You know, where we used to talk about having ours." "Oh, Clara." Margaret's voice softened. "You don't have to go. Nobody would blame you." "But they would talk." Clara stood up, pacing her small kitchen. "You know how people are. If I don't show up, I'll be the bitter ex who couldn't handle seeing him happy. If I do go, I'll be the poor, lonely librarian watching her ex-fiancé marry someone else." "Since when do you care what people think?" "Since always," Clara admitted, stopping to straighten a magnet on her refrigerator. The school's spring carnival schedule stared back at her, full of her neat handwriting. I want to handle this right." "There is no right way to handle your ex-fiancé inviting you to his wedding," Margaret said firmly. "Want me to come over? I just pulled a batch of those oatmeal cookies you love out of the oven." Clara smiled despite herself. "It's 10 in the morning. It's never too early for emotional support cookies." 20 minutes later, they sat at Clara's small kitchen table, the invitation between them like an unwanted guest. Margaret pushed the plate of cookies closer to Clara. "You know what I think?" Margaret said, dunking a cookie in her coffee. "I think he invited you to show off, to prove he's moved on and doing better." Clara wrapped her cardigan tighter around herself. "Maybe. Or maybe he's just being polite. Polite would be sending you a Christmas card. This?" Margaret tapped the invitation. "This is something else." Clara stood up and walked to her window, looking out at her small garden where spring flowers were just starting to bloom. I've spent 3 years building myself back up after he left. The divorce was bad enough, but at least David and I ended things quietly. With Ryan, she shook her head. It was so public, everyone knew. And you survived it, Margaret reminded her. You're stronger than you think, Clara Bennett. Clara turned back to her friend, fighting the familiar tightness in her throat. Am I? Because right now I feel like that same insecure woman who wasn't enough for him. Stop that right now. Margaret stood up, her face serious. You were always enough. Ryan's the one who couldn't see what was right in front of him. Clara managed a weak smile. You have to say that. You're my best friend. I say it because it's true. Margaret crossed the kitchen and put her hands on Clara's shoulders. Look at me. You've built a beautiful life here. The kids at school adore you. You turned that library from a dusty old room into something special. You volunteer at the animal shelter. You're kind and smart and stronger than you know. Tears welled up in Clara's eyes. I just don't want to feel like this anymore. Like I'm always one step behind, always the one people feel sorry for. Then don't let them. Margaret squeezed her shoulders. Go to that wedding. Hold your head high. Show everyone, including Ryan, that you're doing just fine. Clara wiped her eyes, looking again at the invitation. The thought of walking into that hotel, of seeing Ryan with his new bride, made her stomach clench. But the thought of hiding away, of letting fear win, felt even worse. You're right, she said finally, straightening her shoulders. I'm going to go. I'll wear something amazing, smile until my face hurts, and show everyone that Clara Bennett is just fine on her own. That's my girl! Margaret hugged her tight. And you won't be alone. I'll be right there beside you. Clara hugged her back, grateful for the millionth time for her friend's unwavering support. The invitation still sat on her table, but it didn't seem quite so threatening anymore. She could do this. She would do this. Though I'm not above accidentally spilling red wine on his new bride if she gets snippy, Margaret added, making Clara laugh for the first time that morning. No wine attacks, Clara said, wiping the last of her tears away. We're going to be dignified and gracious. Dignified, gracious, and absolutely gorgeous, Margaret corrected. Now finish your cookie. We've got a knockout dress to shop for. Clara picked up her coffee cup, feeling something settle in her chest. The wedding wouldn't be easy, but she would face it with dignity. She was done letting Ryan Matthews make her feel small. It was time to show everyone, including herself, just how far she'd come. The gravel crunched under Clara's tires as she pulled into the winding driveway of the Oakwood Manor. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through ancient oak trees, casting dappled shadows across her car's hood. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, taking several deep breaths before checking her reflection in the rearview mirror, one last time. Her navy blue dress had survived the hour-long drive without wrinkling, and her carefully styled hair still held its soft waves. Margaret had insisted on taking her to the salon that morning, and now Clara was grateful for the extra boost of confidence it gave her. You can do this, she whispered to herself, smoothing her hands over the silk fabric of her dress. It's just one evening. The manor house loomed before her, its stone walls gleaming in the late spring sunshine. Other guests were already making their way inside, their chatter and laughter drifting across the manicured lawn. Clara watched as a young couple walked arm in arm up the steps, looking perfectly at ease. Her stomach tightened. A valet appeared at her car window, startling her from her thoughts. Welcome to Oakwood Manor, ma'am. Clara handed over her keys with a trembling smile and stepped out into the warm afternoon air. Her heels sank slightly into the gravel, and she steadied herself before starting up the path to the entrance. Each step felt deliberate, measured, as if she were walking into battle rather than a wedding. The entrance hall took her breath away despite her nerves. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across cream-colored walls, and arrangements of white roses and baby's breath filled every corner with their sweet scent. A string quartet played softly from somewhere nearby, their music floating through the air like silk ribbons. "Name, please?" A young woman at the reception desk smiled brightly. "Clara Bennett." The words caught slightly in her throat. The woman's smile flickered for just a moment, so brief Clara might have imagined it, before she checked her list. "Yes, Ms. Bennett. You're seated at table 1, the head table." Of course she was. Clara's heart sank as she took her place card. Ryan would have arranged that personally, making sure she had a front row seat to his happiness. The thought made her fingers curl around the elegant cardstock. She followed the signs to the main reception hall, each step echoing against the polished marble floors. The space was even more elaborate than the entrance. Tall windows looked out over perfectly maintained gardens, and crystal vases held towering arrangements of flowers. White chairs with silver bows lined the aisle, and delicate paper lanterns hung from the ceiling like stars. Guests milled about in small groups, their voices creating a constant buzz of conversation. Clara recognized a few faces from her past life with Ryan, colleagues from his law firm, friends from their old social circle. Some nodded politely in her direction, others quickly looked away. She felt like a ghost haunting her own past. "Clara? Clara Bennett?" She turned to see Patricia Wilson, one of Ryan's aunts, approaching with wide eyes. "It's lovely to see you, dear. We didn't expect—" "Ryan invited me," Clara said quickly, forcing a smile. "It was very thoughtful of him." "Yes, well—" Patricia's eyes darted around the room. "How have you been? Still at the library?" The question carried a slight edge that Clara remembered well from her days with Ryan. The implications that being just a librarian wasn't quite good enough for their social circle. "Yes, I am. We just received a grant to expand our children's reading program." Clara lifted her chin slightly. "It's very fulfilling work." "How nice," Patricia said vaguely, already looking past Clara's shoulder. "Oh, I see Margaret Collins arriving. Must say hello." Clara watched her hurry away, feeling the familiar ache of not quite belonging. She made her way to table 1, noting with a sinking heart that it was positioned directly in front of where Ryan and his bride would sit. Her place card sat between 2 names she didn't recognize. More guests were filing in now, filling the space with perfume and conversation and nervous laughter. Clara sat down, smoothing her dress over her knees, trying to look composed and comfortable despite feeling neither. A waiter offered her champagne, which she accepted gratefully. The bubbles felt sharp on her tongue as she sipped, watching the room fill up. Every detail was perfect, from the hand-calligraphed place cards to the crystal stemware catching the late afternoon light. It was exactly the kind of wedding she and Ryan had once planned together, right down to the roses and string quartet. She set her glass down carefully, noticing how her hand trembled slightly. The empty chairs beside her seemed to mock her solitude. Margaret would be seated at a table near the back. Clara had checked the seating chart, too far away to offer any comfort or support. The string quartet began a new piece, something soft and romantic that made Clara's chest ache. She took another sip of champagne, wishing she'd thought to eat something substantial before driving out. The butterflies in her stomach had killed her appetite all day, but now she regretted skipping lunch. More guests filed in, finding their seats, greeting old friends. Clara sat straight-backed in her chair, trying to project an air of calm confidence, while feeling anything but. She could do this. She would do this. It was just one evening, and then she could go home and put this chapter of her life firmly behind her. The sunlight streaming through the windows began to take on the golden quality of late afternoon. Soon, the ceremony would begin. Clara took a deep breath, smoothing her hands over her dress one more time. She could hear the growing excitement in the voices around her, the rustle of anticipation that comes before any wedding. She reached for her champagne glass again, holding it like a shield. The bubbles had gone flat, but she sipped it anyway, needing something to do with her hands. Time seemed to slow down and speed up simultaneously as she waited, each minute stretching endlessly, while somehow racing by too quickly. The ceremony finished with perfect timing, just as the sun began to set, casting a warm glow through the windows. Clara watched as the newlyweds walked back down the aisle, Ryan beaming with that familiar, confident smile she once knew so well. Her fingers twisted the cloth napkin in her lap, creating tiny wrinkles she tried desperately to smooth away. The reception hall quickly filled with chatter and laughter as guests returned from the ceremony space. Waiters glided between tables with trays of appetizers and fresh champagne. All around her, people began pairing up, holding hands, leaning close, sharing private jokes. The empty chairs at her table felt like spotlights highlighting her solitude. Clara's throat tightened as she watched Ryan work the room. He moved from group to group, that practiced charm on full display. His new wife clung to his arm, radiant in her designer gown. When Ryan passed near Clara's table, he barely glanced her way, but she caught the slight smirk that crossed his face. The familiar ache bloomed in her chest, not of lost love, but of wounded pride. "Did you see her dress?" a woman whispered loudly at the next table. "Must have cost a fortune." "Well, Ryan always did have expensive taste," her companion replied, with a meaningful look in Clara's direction. Clara focused intently on her water glass, wishing she could simply fade into the expensive wallpaper. The crystal stemware trembled slightly in her hand as she took a sip. She set it down carefully, determined not to show how much the whispers affected her. The band struck up their first song, and couples began moving to the dance floor. Clara watched them swaying to the music, remembering how Ryan used to lead her confidently through every dance. Now she sat alone, feeling increasingly invisible despite her prominent seat at the head table. "Excuse me," a deep voice suddenly said beside her. "Is this seat taken?" Clara looked up, and up, into the warmest brown eyes she'd ever seen. The stranger was tall and broad-shouldered, with slightly unruly dark hair and a gentle smile that reached those kind eyes. He wore a well-fitted suit, but something about him suggested he was more comfortable in rugged outdoor wear. Before she could respond, he leaned down close to her ear. "Just play along," he whispered. "Act like you're with me." Her heart skipped as he pulled out the chair next to her and sat down with casual confidence. "I'm Jack Monroe," he said in a normal volume, extending his hand. "Sorry I'm late. Traffic was terrible on the mountain roads." Clara found herself taking his hand, noting how it engulfed hers completely. "Clara Bennett," she managed to say. "I know," he smiled. "You're even prettier than your picture." Her cheeks warmed at the compliment, even though she knew it was just part of whatever game he was playing. She could feel curious eyes turning their way, particularly from the table where the gossiping women sat. "Mountain roads?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady and natural. "I'm working on the forest restoration project up near Miller's Peak," he explained, his deep voice carrying just enough to be overheard by nearby tables. "Couldn't exactly wear my work boots to a wedding, though, could I?" His easy manner drew a genuine laugh from Clara. I don't know. They might have added a certain rustic charm to the occasion. Ah, but then everyone would be calling me Mountain Man, he grinned. And we can't have that stealing attention from the happy couple. Clara noticed Ryan doing another circuit of the room, his steps faltering slightly when he saw Jack sitting beside her. The smug expression slipped for just a moment before he turned away. Jack leaned closer, and Clara caught a hint of pine and something woodsy in his cologne. You know, he said conversationally, I think someone at the next table is about to give themselves whiplash from turning around so much. Clara bit back a smile, aware of the whispers now taking on a very different tone. The weight of isolation that had been pressing down on her began to lift, replaced by something that felt surprisingly like hope. I don't suppose mountain men know how to dance? She found herself asking, surprising herself with her boldness. Would you like to find out? Jack stood and offered his hand, his eyes twinkling with warmth and mischief. As Clara placed her hand in his, she felt a spark of something she hadn't experienced in a long time. The thrill of possibility. The curious gazes following them to the dance floor no longer felt judgmental, but rather intrigued. She caught a glimpse of their reflection in one of the tall windows. She, in her carefully chosen dress, he with his rugged charm barely contained by his suit, and had to admit they made quite a striking pair. Jack led Clara onto the dance floor with gentle confidence, his hand warm and steady against her lower back. As they found their spot among the other couples, Clara's nerves made her feet feel like lead. I should warn you, she whispered. I haven't danced in quite a while. No worries, Jack smiled. Just follow my lead, and if you step on my feet, I promise not to tell anyone. The band was playing a slow song, and Jack drew her into a comfortable hold. Clara tried to remember the steps, but her mind went blank. She looked down at her feet, counting silently. Hey, Jack said softly. Look at me, not the floor. The floor's not nearly as interesting. Clara laughed nervously and raised her eyes to meet his. As they began to move, she stumbled slightly, catching herself against his chest. Sorry, I told you I was rusty. Actually, I think that was my fault, Jack said with a wink. These dress shoes are a lot different from my hiking boots. Just then, a waiter hurried past with a tray full of champagne glasses. He caught his foot on someone's chair, and the entire tray tilted precariously. Jack smoothly guided Clara out of the way as several glasses toppled, sending champagne splashing across the floor. See? Jack grinned. You're not the only one having balance issues tonight. Clara felt herself relaxing as they continued to dance. Jack's easy manner and quick humor made her feel comfortable in a way she hadn't expected. So, tell me about this forest restoration project, she said. Well, it's not as exciting as dodging flying champagne, but I love it. We're helping restore areas damaged by last year's wildfires. Been up there for 6 months now. 6 months in the wilderness? Don't you get lonely? Sometimes, he admitted. But the mountains have their own kind of company. There's this old eagle that visits my cabin every morning. I named him Fred. Clara giggled. Fred the eagle? Hey, he looks like a Fred. Very distinguished gentleman, Fred is, although he did steal my breakfast once. As they talked and danced, Clara found herself forgetting to count steps. Her body remembered the rhythm naturally, and Jack's lead was easy to follow. When she did misstep, he covered it so smoothly that no one would notice. You know what's funny? She said after a while. I was dreading this wedding so much, but now... She trailed off, not sure how to express the lightness she was feeling. Now you're having fun showing everyone what they're missing? Jack suggested with a gentle smile. Clara blushed. I wouldn't go that far. I would. You've got half the room wondering who this mystery woman is that they somehow overlooked before." A faster song started playing, and Jack spun her playfully. Clara laughed out loud, the sound carrying across the dance floor. She caught sight of Ryan watching them from across the room, his expression unreadable. "Your ex?" Jack asked quietly. "That obvious, huh?" "Only because you tensed up for a second there. Want to give him something to really look at?" Before Clara could ask what he meant, Jack led her into a series of quick turns that had her dress swirling around her legs. She followed instinctively, surprised by how natural it felt. When they finished, several nearby couples actually applauded. "Where did you learn to dance like that?" she asked, breathless. "Would you believe wilderness survival training?" "Not for a second." "Okay, you got me. My mom taught ballroom dancing. I was her practice partner growing up." As the evening progressed, Clara found herself sharing stories about her work at the library, about the kids who came in for story time, and even about her divorce. Jack listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest. Finally, it was time for the traditional wedding toasts. Everyone returned to their seats, and Clara was surprised to find she didn't mind being at the head table anymore. Jack's presence beside her felt like a shield against any awkwardness. The best man stood up, raising his glass. "To Ryan and Jessica," he announced. "May your love story be one for the ages." Clara lifted her glass along with everyone else, but she noticed Ryan's eyes weren't on his new bride. Instead, he was staring at her with an expression that looked almost like regret. She realized with surprise that she didn't feel any satisfaction from his apparent jealousy. Instead, she felt sorry for him. Sorry that he couldn't simply be happy on his wedding day without comparing and competing. She turned to Jack, who was watching her with understanding in his eyes. "Thank you," she said softly, "for making this evening so much better than I imagined it could be." "The pleasure was all mine," he replied, and somehow she knew he meant it. The band struck up another song, and Jack stood, offering his hand once again. "What do you say? One more dance before we scandalize any more wedding guests?" Clara took his hand without hesitation, feeling truly joyful for the first time in years. As they moved back onto the dance floor, she caught her reflection in one of the windows and hardly recognized herself. Her eyes were bright, her smile genuine, and she moved with a confidence she'd forgotten she possessed. Ryan's eyes followed them, but Clara barely noticed. She was too busy laughing at Jack's story about Fred the Eagle's latest breakfast-stealing adventures to care about her ex's jealousy anymore. "Would you like to get some air?" Jack asked, gesturing toward the French doors that led to the venue's garden. "I spotted some nice walking paths earlier." Clara nodded gratefully. The reception hall had grown warm and stuffy, and her feet needed a break from dancing. Outside, the evening air felt cool and fresh against her skin. String lights twinkled in the trees, creating a magical atmosphere along the stone pathways. "This is beautiful," she breathed, taking in the well-tended flower beds and carefully trimmed hedges. "Sure is," Jack agreed, "though I prefer my nature a little wilder. You should see the sunset from my work site up in the mountains." "What exactly do you do up there?" Clara asked, genuinely curious. Jack's face lit up with passion as he explained. "I'm part of a forest restoration team. After last year's wildfires, we're helping the ecosystem recover. Planting new trees, monitoring wildlife return, preventing erosion, that kind of thing." "That sounds meaningful," Clara said. "How long will you be working on it?" "The project runs another 6 months," he replied, a hint of something like regret in his voice. "Then we'll see. I've grown attached to this area." They paused by a stone fountain, its gentle splashing creating a peaceful backdrop. Clara sat on the wide rim, and Jack joined her, leaving a respectful distance between them. "Can I ask you something personal?" Clara ventured. When Jack nodded, she continued. "Earlier, when we were dancing, you seemed to understand exactly how I was feeling about being at my ex's wedding. Have you been through something similar?" Jack was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the water. "Not exactly the same, but yeah. I was engaged once, about 5 years ago. Sarah was a wildlife photographer. We met when she was doing a story on forest conservation." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "She got an offer to join a prestigious nature magazine. The catch was, it meant constant travel. She chose the job." "I'm sorry," Clara said softly. "Don't be. It hurt like hell at the time, but now I'm grateful. Better to know before the wedding than after, right?" He gave her a gentle smile. "What about you? If you don't mind sharing?" Clara took a deep breath. "My divorce was finalized 8 months ago. Tom and I were married for 12 years. He met someone at work. Younger, more exciting." She twisted her hands in her lap. "The worst part wasn't even losing him. It was losing my confidence, my sense of who I was." "And now?" Jack's voice was kind, encouraging. "Now, I'm starting to remember." She smiled. "Dancing with you tonight helped, actually. I'd forgotten how it feels to just be myself and have fun." A soft light flickered between them, then another. Clara gasped in delight as more fireflies emerged from the garden, their gentle glow creating an ethereal display. "Would you look at that?" Jack whispered, not wanting to disturb the moment. "Nature's own light show." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fireflies dance around them. One landed briefly on Clara's hand, and she held perfectly still, enchanted by its delicate light. "You know what I've learned?" Jack said after a while. "Sometimes the best things in life are the simplest ones. A sunset, a firefly, a conversation with someone who gets it." Clara looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something shift in her heart. Here was someone who understood loss, but hadn't let it make him bitter. Someone who found joy in small moments and wasn't afraid to share that joy with others. The evening air had grown cooler, and Clara shivered slightly. Jack shrugged off his jacket and offered it to her. "Such a gentleman," she teased, but accepted it gratefully. "My mom would expect nothing less," he chuckled. "Speaking of which, I should probably head out soon. I've got an early start tomorrow, heading up to check on some of our new plantings." Clara tried to hide her disappointment, but Jack must have caught it because he added quickly, "But I was wondering, there's this great hiking trail about 20 minutes from town. Nothing too strenuous, but the morning views are incredible. Would you like to join me?" Clara hesitated only briefly. "I'd like that." "Great!" His smile was warm and genuine. "How about I pick you up at 7? We can grab coffee on the way." They exchanged phone numbers and arranged details for the morning meeting. As they walked back toward the reception hall, Clara felt lighter than she had in months. The evening that she'd dreaded had turned into something unexpectedly wonderful. Just before they reached the doors, Jack turned to her. "Thank you for sharing your evening with me, Clara, and for trusting me with your story." "Thank you for making it so easy to share," she replied softly. The fireflies continued their dance in the garden behind them, nature's quiet reminder that beauty could appear in the most unexpected moments. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as Clara waited, her breath visible in the cool air. She'd woken before her alarm, spent extra time choosing comfortable hiking clothes, and still arrived 10 minutes early. Now she stood beside her car, clutching a travel mug of coffee, wondering if she was crazy for agreeing to this adventure. A white pickup truck rumbled into the lot, and Jack's familiar figure emerged, carrying 2 paper bags. "Morning," he called out, his voice cheerful. I brought breakfast sandwiches. Hope you like eggs and cheese." Clara's nervousness melted at his easy manner. "You didn't have to do that?" "Can't hike on an empty stomach," he said, handing her one of the bags. "Ready for an adventure?" The trail had started at the edge of the parking lot, winding up into the forest. Morning mist still clung to the trees, creating an almost magical atmosphere. Jack led the way, pointing out different bird calls and explaining which trees were native to the area. "See those marks on the bark?" He gestured to a nearby maple. "That's from a woodpecker. They're nature's forest doctors, helping keep the insect population in check." Clara found herself fascinated by his knowledge. "You really love this, don't you? The forest, the wildlife." "It's where I feel most at home," he admitted. "Cities have their charm, but out here, everything makes sense. Everything has its purpose." They climbed, higher, the trail becoming steeper. Clara's breathing grew heavier, but she was surprised to find she didn't mind the exertion. The fresh air filled her lungs, and each step brought new discoveries. "Wait till you see what's ahead," Jack said, offering his hand as they navigated around a large boulder. "There's a clearing with a view that'll take your breath away." Clara accepted his help, noting how naturally their hands fit together. "I've lived here for 15 years, she said, "and I've never been on this trail." "Let me guess, too busy with work, life, other people's expectations?" She laughed softly. "All of the above. Tom, my ex, he wasn't really the outdoor type. He preferred golf courses to hiking trails." "And what about you? What does Clara prefer?" The question made her pause. "I'm starting to think I never really asked myself that question before." She looked around at the sunlight filtering through the leaves. "But this feels right." They reached a particularly tricky section where recent rain had made the path slippery. Jack moved ahead, testing each step. "Watch your footing here," he warned. "The moss can be treacherous." Despite his warning, Clara's foot slipped on a wet rock. Before she could fall, Jack's strong hands caught her shoulders, steadying her. "I've got you," he said quietly, his face close to hers. "Trust me?" "Yes," she whispered, surprising herself with how true it felt. He guided her carefully across the difficult stretch, one step at a time. When they reached safer ground, Clara found herself laughing. "Well, that was exciting." "You handled it like a pro," Jack grinned. "Ready for the grand finale?" The clearing, when they reached it, lived up to his promise. The valley spread out below them, morning mist still clinging to the lower areas while the sun painted the sky in soft pinks and golds. Clara stood in awe, drinking in the view. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "Worth the climb?" "Absolutely." They found a fallen log to sit on, sharing the remainder of their breakfast as the sun continued to rise. Clara felt more at peace than she had in months. "Can I tell you something?" she said after a while. "Last night, at the wedding, I was dreading every minute of it. I thought it would be this horrible reminder of everything I'd lost. But then you showed up, and somehow, it became about possibility instead of loss." Jack was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the horizon. "Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? Sometimes the worst moments lead us exactly where we need to be." "Is that what happened with Sarah? Your ex?" He nodded. "If she hadn't chosen her career over our relationship, I might never have taken this forest restoration project. Never would have ended up at that wedding last night." "Never would have saved a damsel in distress?" Clara teased. "You're hardly in distress," he said seriously. "A little lost, maybe. But who isn't sometimes?" They shared stories as the morning wore on. Clara about her dreams of writing children's books, Jack about his travels across the country working on different conservation projects. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by comfortable silences and shared laughter. "You know what's funny?" Clara said as they started their descent. "I can't remember the last time I laughed this much. Real laughter, not the polite kind you do at social functions." "That's because you're not trying to be anyone but yourself," Jack replied. "It looks good on you." The comment made her blush, but she didn't try to hide it. Instead, she found herself sharing memories she thought she'd locked away, about her childhood dreams, her love of storytelling, the way she used to make up adventures for her stuffed animals. "You should write those stories," Jack encouraged. "The ones you mentioned, about teaching kids to love nature." "Maybe I will," she said. And for the first time in years, it felt like more than just a dream. They encountered another slippery section on the way down, but this time Clara felt more confident. Jack still offered his hand, and she took it, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to. As they neared the parking lot, Clara felt a familiar twinge of disappointment, the same she'd felt when their evening had ended at the wedding. But this time, it was tempered by something else. Hope. Hope that this wasn't an ending at all, but rather another beginning. The morning had brought more than just exercise and fresh air. It had brought laughter, trust, and the kind of connection that felt both surprising and inevitable. Looking at Jack's profile against the late morning sun, Clara realized that sometimes the best paths in life were the unexpected ones. Clara and Jack returned to the reception venue, where several guests had gathered for the post-wedding brunch. The morning sun streamed through the large windows, catching the crystal decorations and creating rainbow patterns across the polished floors. Clara felt lighter, more alive, despite her slightly aching muscles from the hike. "Clara Bennett?" a familiar voice called out. Mrs. Henderson, her former high school English teacher, approached with a warm smile. "My goodness, you're positively glowing today." Before Clara could respond, Ryan's voice cut in from nearby. "Must be all that fresh air. Though I remember when just getting Clara to walk to the mailbox was a challenge." He laughed, the sound holding an edge that made Clara's stomach tighten. Jack's steady presence beside her helped Clara maintain her composure. "Amazing what the right company can inspire," she replied evenly, meeting Ryan's gaze. Several other guests gathered around, creating an impromptu social circle. Clara noticed Sarah Matthews, the town's gossip queen, watching with barely concealed interest. "Jack was just showing me the hiking trails," Clara explained, her voice carrying a confidence that surprised her. "It's beautiful up there." "Hiking?" Ryan raised his eyebrows. "That's different for you. Careful, though. Wouldn't want to get in over your head with anything too challenging." His words dripped with false concern. "Clara handled herself perfectly," Jack interjected smoothly. "She's quite adventurous when given the chance." Mrs. Henderson beamed. "It's wonderful to see you branching out, dear. You seem different today. More yourself, somehow." Ryan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Well, people don't really change that much, do they? Deep down, we're who we've always been." Clara felt the old familiar urge to shrink away from the subtle criticism, but something had shifted inside her. "Actually, Ryan, I disagree. Sometimes all it takes is someone believing in you to help you remember who you really are." A murmur of approval rippled through the small crowd. Sarah Matthews was practically vibrating with excitement at this exchange, no doubt already planning how to share it with her book club. "Speaking of change," Mrs. Henderson said, "Jack, how long will you be staying in our little town? The forest restoration project must be quite extensive." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She'd been deliberately avoiding this question, not wanting to face the temporary nature of Jack's presence. The initial phase is scheduled for 3 months, Jack answered, though there's potential for extension depending on how things progress. 3 months. The words echoed in Clara's mind as she tried to maintain her composed expression. How convenient, Ryan commented, his tone suggesting anything but. Just passing through, then? Clara watched several heads turn in interest, and she could practically hear the wheels turning in their minds. The quiet librarian and the temporary mountain man. It was exactly the kind of story that would keep the town talking for weeks. I prefer to think of it as being exactly where I'm meant to be, Jack replied, his hand finding the small of Clara's back in a gesture that was both protective and reassuring. The conversation shifted to other topics, but Clara remained acutely aware of Ryan's periodic glances in her direction. When he finally excused himself, his new wife calling him over, Clara felt herself relax slightly. "You handled that beautifully," Jack whispered close to her ear. "I had good backup," she smiled, though her heart felt heavy with the reminder of his eventual departure. Throughout the brunch, various townspeople approached their table. Clara noticed the way they looked at her differently now, with curiosity and something like approval. Even Betty from the library, who usually only spoke about overdue books, seemed eager to chat. "I haven't seen you smile like this in ages," Betty commented warmly. "It suits you." As the afternoon wore on, Clara found herself repeatedly catching Ryan watching her from across the room. But instead of the usual discomfort his attention brought, she felt something different. Pity, perhaps. He seemed smaller somehow, less intimidating than he had just yesterday. "Remember when you told me people don't really change?" Clara said during one unavoidable interaction. "I think maybe they just need the right reason to show who they've been all along." Ryan's face flushed slightly, and for once he had no clever response. The realization hit Clara then. She was no longer the same person who had received that wedding invitation with trembling hands. In just 24 hours, something fundamental had shifted. But as she watched Jack chatting easily with a group of locals, another reality settled in her chest. This transformation had come with a timer attached. 3 months. 90 days to explore whatever this connection was before Jack would move on to his next project. The thought should have terrified her, sent her running for the safety of her familiar routine. Instead, she found herself wanting to make every moment count. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Jack's voice broke through her reverie as he rejoined her. "Just thinking about time," she answered honestly. "How quickly things can change." "Change isn't always bad," he said softly, his eyes holding hers. "No," she agreed, feeling the truth of it in her bones. "Sometimes it's exactly what we need." Around them, the brunch continued, a symphony of clinking glasses and conversation. Clara could feel the curious glances, hear the whispered speculations about her and Jack. But for the first time in years, she didn't mind being the center of attention. The woman they were watching, confident, smiling, standing tall beside this unexpected companion, was finally the real her. After the brunch wound down, Clara and Jack found themselves strolling down Main Street. The afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the historic buildings, their brick facades telling stories of decades gone by. "I can't believe I've never really played tourist in my own town," Clara admitted, looking at the familiar streets with fresh eyes. "Then allow me to be your guide," Jack said with a playful bow. "Even though I've only been here 3 days?" Clara laughed, the sound carrying on the warm breeze. "The blind leading the blind?" "I prefer to think of it as 2 explorers on an adventure." Jack's eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "Look, Mrs. Peterson's bakery. Have you tried her famous maple pecan rolls?" "Actually, no," Clara admitted. "I always meant to, but no time like the present." Jack pulled open the door, setting off the cheerful bell above. The aroma of fresh-baked goods enveloped them. Mrs. Peterson, flour dusting her apron, beamed at them from behind the counter. "Clara Bennett! And who's this handsome fellow?" Clara felt her cheeks warm. "This is Jack Monroe. He's working on the forest restoration project." "2 maple pecan rolls, please," Jack requested, ignoring Clara's protests about paying. They took their treats to the small park across the street, settling on a bench beneath an old oak tree. Clara took a bite and closed her eyes. "Oh my goodness, how have I lived here all this time and never tried these?" "Sometimes we get so caught up in our routines, we forget to notice the sweet things right in front of us," Jack observed, brushing a crumb from his shirt. Clara nodded, thinking how apt that observation was. "I used to be more adventurous, you know. Before Ryan?" Jack asked gently. "Before I started believing what other people thought was more important than what I wanted." Clara fiddled with her napkin. "It sounds silly when I say it out loud." "It's not silly at all." Jack's voice was soft but firm. "We all lose ourselves sometimes." They watched a group of children playing nearby, their laughter carrying across the grass. A mother duck led her ducklings in a wobbling line toward the small pond. "What about you?" Clara asked. "You mentioned heartbreak last night in the garden." Jack was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. "Her name was Sarah. We were together for 5 years, engaged for 1. She decided she wanted a different life, one with more excitement, she said. Less trees, more city lights." "I'm sorry," Clara said softly, understanding the weight of those words. "It took me a while to realize that loving nature, finding peace in quiet moments, those weren't flaws that needed fixing. They were part of who I am." Clara touched his arm lightly. "She was wrong, you know. There's nothing more exciting than someone who's passionate about what they do." Jack's smile returned. "Look who's talking. The librarian who lights up when discussing books with her students. How did you know about that?" "Betty might have mentioned it at brunch. She's quite the fan of yours, actually." They spent the next hour wandering through the town's antique shops, making up stories about the odd items they found. Clara discovered she could make Jack laugh with her increasingly outlandish tales about a particularly ugly ceramic cat. "Clearly," she insisted with mock seriousness, "this was a royal cat, banished from its kingdom for refusing to catch mice. It now spends its days judging everyone who passes by." At the ice cream parlor, they shared a sundae, debating the merits of various toppings with the intensity usually reserved for political discussions. Jack insisted that sprinkles were essential, while Clara championed the superiority of hot fudge. "We'll have to agree to disagree," Clara finally conceded, stealing the last cherry. "I suppose some differences can't be resolved," Jack agreed solemnly, though his eyes twinkled. As they walked along the river path, Clara found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone. About the crushing loneliness after her divorce, the way she'd hidden behind her books, the fear that she'd never trust her own judgment again. "The worst part wasn't even the end of the marriage," she confessed. "It was realizing I'd stopped believing in myself somewhere along the way." Jack listened intently, his steady presence encouraging her to continue. "And now?" he asked. "Now, I'm starting to remember who I was before I forgot." She smiled up at him. "Thank you for that." The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. They found themselves back at the park, now quiet except for the evening bird song. Jack checked his watch, his expression turning serious. "I should probably head back to my cabin. Early start tomorrow at the restoration site." Clara felt her heart sink slightly, even though she'd known this moment was coming. "Of course, the trees won't restore themselves." "Clara," Jack turned to face her fully. These past 2 days have been unexpected, in the best possible way. They really have, she agreed, trying to keep her voice light despite the growing ache in her chest. I need to be honest with you, he continued. This project has a definite end date. 3 months isn't very long. I know, Clara said quickly, not wanting to hear the gentle letdown she was sure was coming. You don't have to explain. Actually, I do. Jack took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. Because I think we might have something worth exploring here, even if time isn't on our side. Clara looked at their joined hands, then back at his face. It's complicated. Life usually is, he agreed. But sometimes the complicated things are the most worthwhile. The evening breeze rustled through the oak leaves above them, carrying the sweet scent of nearby honeysuckle. Everything felt both incredibly real and somehow dreamlike. The way the fading sunlight caught in Jack's hair, the warmth of his hand in hers, the understanding that this moment marked a choice. I want to show you something, Jack said, his eyes lighting up with sudden inspiration. Do you trust me? Clara nodded without hesitation, surprising herself with how true it felt. I do. They drove in Jack's weathered pickup truck along winding mountain roads, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows through the trees. The truck climbed higher, and Clara watched the town grow smaller below them. The radio played softly, old country songs that seemed perfectly suited to the moment. Almost there, Jack said, turning onto a narrow dirt road. I found this spot during my first week here. It's become my thinking place. The truck finally stopped at what looked like a dead end. Jack helped Clara out, then led her through a short trail between towering pines. They emerged onto a rocky outcrop that took Clara's breath away. The entire valley stretched out before them, bathed in golden light. The small town looked like a collection of doll houses from this height, and the winding river caught the sun like a ribbon of fire. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still holding patches of snow. Oh, Jack, Clara whispered. This is incredible. He spread out a blanket he'd grabbed from the truck, and they sat together, shoulders touching. The air was cooler at this elevation, carrying the scent of pine needles and wild mountain flowers. You know what I regret most? Clara said after a while, watching the sun inch closer to the horizon. Not the failed marriage, or even saying yes to Ryan when I knew deep down it wasn't right. It's all the years I spent being afraid to really live. Jack turned to look at her, his expression gentle. What were you afraid of? Everything. She laughed softly. Judgment, failure, being alone, being not alone but with the wrong person. I built this careful little life where nothing could hurt me, but nothing could really touch me either. And now? Clara met his gaze. Now I'm terrified in a completely different way, because for the first time in years, I feel alive. Really alive. And that means I have something to lose again. Jack reached over and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. I know exactly what you mean. After Sarah left, I threw myself into my work. Trees are safer than people. They don't leave. They don't change their minds. But they can't love you back either, Clara said softly. The sun touched the mountain peaks, painting the sky in brilliant streaks of pink and gold. A cool breeze rustled through the pines behind them, carrying the wild, sweet scent of the mountains. You know what I love about sunset? Jack asked, his voice low. It's this perfect moment between day and night, when everything seems possible, like the world is holding its breath, waiting to see what happens next. Clara felt her heart beating faster. And what happens next? Instead of answering, Jack turned to face her fully. His hand came up to cup her cheek, so gently it made her want to cry. "I think," he said slowly, "that I'm falling in love with you, Clara Bennett. And it terrifies me because I've never felt anything like this before." The last rays of sunlight caught in his eyes, turning them to warm amber. Clara could see every emotion there: hope, fear, joy, and something deeper that made her breath catch. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered. "And you're right. It's terrifying. But it's wonderful too." Jack leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. But Clara met him halfway, and when their lips touched, it felt like coming home. The kiss was gentle, tender, full of unspoken promises and shared understanding. When they finally parted, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky awash in deep purples and fading gold. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, Clara's head resting on Jack's shoulder, his arm warm around her waist. The first stars were beginning to appear overhead, bright pinpoints of light in the darkening sky. "Clara," Jack said finally, his voice heavy, "there's something I need to tell you." She felt her heart constrict, already knowing what was coming. "I have to leave tomorrow morning. The main phase of the restoration project starts at first light, and I need to be there to oversee it." He turned to look at her, his expression torn. "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you all afternoon." Clara nodded, fighting back tears. "I understand. Work is important." "You're important too," he said fiercely. "These past 2 days with you, they've changed everything. I just don't know how to reconcile that with my responsibilities." The night air had grown cooler, but Clara barely noticed. All she could focus on was the warmth of Jack's presence, knowing it would soon be gone. The valley below had begun to twinkle with lights, like earthbound stars, as darkness settled over the mountain. "How long will you be gone?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. 3 months minimum. The project needs constant supervision during this phase." He tightened his arm around her. "It's the worst possible timing." Clara managed a small smile. "Timing has never been my strong suit anyway." They sat there together as the last colors faded from the sky, both acutely aware of each passing moment. The mountain air grew crisp with night, carrying the haunting call of a distant owl. Neither wanted to be the first to suggest heading back down, to start the countdown to goodbye. Clara woke to sunlight streaming through her hotel room window. For a moment, she lay still, letting the memories of last night wash over her. The sunset, the kiss, Jack's confession. Her heart fluttered, then sank as she remembered. He was leaving today. The bedside clock read 6:15 in the morning. She had maybe an hour before Jack would head out. Her hands trembled as she got dressed, choosing a soft blue sweater that brought out her eyes. She caught herself in the mirror and paused. There was something different about her reflection, a glow she hadn't seen in years, despite the worry in her eyes. Downstairs in the hotel lobby, early risers from the wedding party mingled over coffee. Ryan stood with his new wife and several guests, looking fresh despite yesterday's celebrations. His eyes tracked Clara as she entered, narrowing slightly at her changed appearance. "Early bird catches the worm?" he called out, his tone carrying that familiar edge of condescension. "You're usually such a late sleeper, Clara." She managed a polite smile. "People change, Ryan. Sometimes for the better." Before he could respond, she spotted Jack near the hotel entrance, loading his duffel bag into his truck. Her heart did a little flip as she walked toward him, trying to keep her pace steady despite wanting to run. "Hey there, mountain man," she said softly. Jack turned, his face lighting up. "Clara." He pulled her into a quick hug. mindful of the watching eyes in the lobby. "I was hoping to see you before I left." "Need any help?" she asked, gesturing to his remaining bags. "I wouldn't say no to some company while I finish up." They worked together in comfortable silence, loading Jack's equipment into the truck. Each item felt heavy with finality: his climbing gear, work boots, weather-worn backpack. Clara found herself memorizing details: the way his flannel shirt stretched across his shoulders, how his hair caught the morning light, the gentle strength in his hands. "You know," Jack said, adjusting a strap on his gear, 3 months isn't really that long." Clara's throat tightened. "It isn't?" "No." He paused, looking at her intently. Unless you think it is?" The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. Clara could feel Ryan and the others watching from the lobby windows, could sense the weight of their curiosity and judgment. But for once, she didn't care what they thought. "I think," she said carefully, "that it depends on what happens after those 3 months." Jack stepped closer, lowering his voice. "What do you want to happen?" "I want—" Clara took a deep breath. "I want to know if this is real. If what we felt last night was just a beautiful moment, or if it could be something more." "It's real for me," Jack said firmly. "I meant what I said last night, Clara, every word." A burst of laughter from the lobby made Clara jump. Ryan and his friends were heading out for breakfast, their voices carrying across the parking lot. She saw Ryan pause, watching her and Jack with an unreadable expression. Jack followed her gaze and frowned. "You okay?" "Yes," Clara said, surprising herself by meaning it. "For the first time in a long time, I really am okay, even though you're leaving. Even though I'm scared. I feel like I've woken up from a long sleep." Jack's smile was worth every moment of vulnerability. He reached out and squeezed her hand, his touch sending warmth through her entire body. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his truck. He pulled out a small, worn notebook. "It's my trail journal. I want you to have it. Maybe it'll help you understand me better while I'm gone." Clara took the notebook, running her fingers over its leather cover. "Jack, I can't take this. It's personal. That's exactly why I want you to have it." He checked his watch and grimaced. "I need to go. The crew will be waiting." Clara nodded, clutching the journal to her chest. "I know." They stood there, neither wanting to make the first move toward goodbye. The morning sun had risen fully now, casting long shadows across the parking lot. A few early birds called from nearby trees, their songs seeming to echo Clara's aching heart. "Clara," Jack started, then stopped. He ran a hand through his hair, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Would it be okay if I called you, when I can get service up there?" "I'd like that," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "A lot." He pulled her into one last hug, this one longer than before. Clara breathed in his scent, pine needles and morning air, and something uniquely Jack. She felt his lips brush her forehead, so quickly she might have imagined it. "Take care of yourself, Clara Bennett," he whispered. Then he was climbing into his truck, starting the engine. Clara stood rooted to the spot, watching as he pulled away. He raised his hand in a final wave, and she managed to wave back, the journal pressed against her heart like a shield. She stood there long after his truck had disappeared around the bend, listening to the morning birds and feeling the weight of possibility and uncertainty settling around her shoulders. 3 months suddenly seemed like an eternity. From the lobby, she heard Ryan's voice. "Well, well, looks like our Clara's still chasing fairy tales." But for once, his words didn't sting. Clara looked down at the journal in her hands, thinking of last night's sunset and the promise in Jack's eyes. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't the same person who had arrived at this wedding dreading every moment. That Clara was gone, and in her place stood someone stronger, someone who dared to hope again. The morning breeze carried the scent of pine trees and possibility, and somewhere in the distance, a truck wound its way up a mountain road, carrying with it pieces of Clara's newly awakened heart. Clara wandered into the small downtown area, her footsteps echoing on the empty sidewalk. Jack's journal weighed heavily in her purse, but she wasn't ready to read it yet. The morning sun cast long shadows across the storefronts, and she found herself noticing details she'd overlooked before. The cheerful window boxes filled with purple petunias bursting with life. The way sunlight caught and sparkled on the old brass door handles, worn smooth by years of touch. The warm, yeasty smell of fresh bread wafting from the corner bakery that made her stomach rumble appreciatively. The town seemed different today, or perhaps she was seeing it through new eyes. Shop owners were flipping their signs from closed to open, nodding friendly greetings as they caught sight of her. Birds hopped along the eaves of buildings, chirping their morning songs. Even the cracks in the sidewalk seemed to tell a story of endurance and character rather than neglect. Inside May's Cafe, the morning regulars looked up and smiled. Clara usually avoided eye contact, ducking into a corner table with her head down, but today she smiled back, her lips curving upward without effort. "Good morning," she said, surprising herself with the warmth in her voice and the lack of anxiety in her chest. "Well, look who's glowing today," May called from behind the counter, wiping her flour-dusted hands on her faded apron. The older woman's eyes twinkled with curiosity as she leaned forward, her silver hair caught in its usual neat bun. "Your usual black coffee and wheat toast?" "Actually," Clara said, glancing at the display case filled with fresh baked treats she'd always considered too indulgent, "I think I'll try something different." The words felt symbolic somehow, like tiny steps toward a new version of herself, a Clara who wasn't afraid to experience life's sweetness. As she waited for her cinnamon roll, dripping with gooey frosting, and hazelnut coffee with a cloud of whipped cream on top, Clara noticed an elderly man struggling with the heavy door, his gnarled hands slipping on the handle. Without hesitation, she hurried over to help him, pulling it open and holding it steady as he shuffled inside. "Thank you, dear," he said, patting her hand with fingers that trembled slightly with age, his eyes crinkled at the corners behind thick glasses. "Not many young folks would notice an old-timer like me these days. Everyone's always in such a rush." "I'm learning to pay more attention," Clara replied, thinking of Jack's quiet observations about the world around them, how he'd shown her beauty in places she'd stopped seeing. "Can I help you to a table?" After assisting the gentleman and finishing her breakfast, savoring each sweet, cinnamon-spiced bite instead of eating absently, she wandered into Riverside Books, her favorite refuge since childhood. The familiar bell above the door chimed its welcome, and Sarah, the owner with her perpetual ink-stained fingers, poked her head around a towering shelf of new arrivals. "Clara, I missed you yesterday. Thought maybe you'd skip town for that wedding. Everyone's talking about how beautiful it was." Sarah's knowing eyes studied Clara's face. "Something's different about you today." Clara laughed softly, running her fingers along the spines of nearby books. "Is it that obvious? I almost did leave town, but I'm glad I didn't." "Met someone special at that wedding, did you?" Sarah teased gently. Clara felt a blush warm her cheeks but didn't deny it. "Maybe I just remembered something I'd forgotten about myself." She found herself straightening books as she browsed, adjusting misaligned spines and returning abandoned titles to their proper places, something she usually only did at the school library. When a young mother struggled to entertain her restless toddler in the children's section, Juggling a squirming child and an overflowing diaper bag, Clara offered to read a story. The child settled immediately in her lap, tiny finger pointing at illustrations as Clara gave different voices to each character. Other children wandered over, sitting cross-legged on the colorful rug, entranced by her storytelling. "You have such a nice reading voice," the mother said afterward, relief and gratitude evident in her tired eyes. "Thank you for making time for us. I haven't been able to browse for a book of my own in months." "It was my pleasure," Clara replied, and meant it with her whole heart. Before Jack, she might have stayed hidden behind the shelves, too self-conscious to offer help, too afraid of being noticed or rejected. Around noon, she walked to the park where she and Jack had spent yesterday afternoon. Their footprints were still visible in the sandy path near the duck pond, side by side, a physical reminder that he wasn't just a beautiful dream. Clara sat on their bench, unwrapping her sandwich from the deli, watching dragonflies skim across the water's surface. A teenage girl slumped on a nearby bench, clearly upset, mascara smudged beneath red-rimmed eyes. Clara remembered how Jack had approached her at the wedding, how his simple presence and kind attention had changed everything, how one moment of connection had shifted her entire world. "Would you like half?" she offered, holding out her sandwich. The girl looked startled, then grateful, hunger winning over suspicion. "Bad day?" Clara asked gently as they ate in companionable silence. "The worst," the girl sighed, picking at the crust. "Boy trouble. He promised we'd go to prom together, then asked my so-called friend instead. Everyone at school will be talking about it on Monday." They talked for almost an hour. Clara shared her own story, both the pain of her past and the unexpected joy of the present, carefully edited for a teenage audience, but honest about how loss had nearly closed her heart forever. The girl left smiling, standing a little straighter, with Clara's number programmed into her phone. Just in case. As afternoon faded into evening, Clara found herself drawn back to the wedding venue's grounds, her feet carrying her there almost without conscious decision. The cleanup crew had finished, removing all traces of yesterday's celebration except for a few scattered rose petals on the grass. The garden lay peaceful and empty, the string lights dark, the chairs gone. But the magic lingered. She settled onto a stone bench, watching the sky turn pink and gold, and finally a deep violet. Crickets began their evening chorus from the tall grasses, and the first fireflies blinked on and off among the flower beds. Her phone felt heavy in her pocket. No messages, no missed calls. She knew Jack probably wouldn't have service yet in the remote forest areas where he was working. But still, hope was a persistent thing, fluttering in her chest like a trapped bird. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of pine trees that now reminded her powerfully of Jack. The woody, natural smell of his skin when she'd pressed her face against his chest. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, remembering their sunset kiss, the gentle pressure of his lips against hers, the way he'd looked at her like she was something precious and rare when they pulled apart. A family of deer, a doe and 2 spotted fawns, emerged from the tree line, grazing peacefully on the manicured lawn. Clara sat very still, barely breathing, watching them. Jack would have appreciated this moment, the quiet beauty of it, the privilege of being still enough to witness nature's small miracles. She wished she could describe it to him later, see his eyes light up with shared wonder. "Please come back," she whispered to the darkening sky, her words barely audible even to herself. It wasn't just Jack she was asking for. It was everything he represented. Hope, joy, the courage to be vulnerable again, the chance to build something lasting from these fragile beginnings. The first stars appeared overhead, bright points of light in the deepening blue. Clara stayed there, letting herself feel everything. The lingering warmth of new love, the ache of separation, the fear of loss, and underneath it all, a steady current of hope she thought she'd lost forever in the wreckage of her marriage. From her purse, Jack's journal pressed against her side, full of unread words and promises. She traced its outline through the fabric, wondering what secrets and thoughts he'd trusted her to keep. But for now, Clara just sat in the growing darkness, her heart open to whatever might come next, no longer hiding from possibilities that frightened her. For the first time in years, she felt fully alive, fully present in her own story. Whatever happened tomorrow, whether Jack returned or not, today she had chosen to embrace life again, to risk heartbreak for the chance at joy. And that, she realized with quiet certainty, was already a victory. The evening breeze rustled through the garden, carrying the sweet scent of late summer flowers. Clara wrapped her arms tighter around herself, watching the last traces of sunlight paint the sky in deep purples and blues. Her thoughts drifted to Jack, wondering where his truck was now on the long mountain roads. A twig snapped behind her. Clara turned, expecting to see one of the venue's staff. Instead, her heart stopped. There, silhouetted against the darkening sky, stood Jack. His familiar rugged frame was unmistakable, still wearing the same flannel shirt from this morning. "I got halfway there," he said softly, his voice carrying across the quiet garden. "Halfway up that mountain road, and everything felt wrong." Clara stood shakily, her legs barely supporting her. "Jack." He took a step closer, his boots crunching on the gravel path. "I kept thinking about your laugh, about how you light up when you talk about your students at the library, about the way you trusted me enough to share your story." Tears welled in Clara's eyes as Jack continued moving toward her, his words washing over her like a warm summer rain. "I've spent years telling myself that temporary was safer, that moving from project to project meant never having to risk my heart again." He stopped a few feet away, close enough that Clara could see the emotion in his eyes. "But then you happened, Clara Bennett." A small sob escaped her throat. "But your work can be done from here." His smile was gentle, sure. "I called my supervisor during that drive. There's a local position opening up. They need someone to oversee the watershed restoration project in this county. It's permanent." Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Behind them, voices drifted from the venue's patio, where several wedding guests and townspeople were gathering for evening drinks. "I don't want temporary anymore," Jack said, taking another step closer. "I want morning hikes and evening talks. I want to show you every hidden trail in these mountains. I want to sit in your library and watch you share stories with your kids." May from the cafe had stepped onto the patio, followed by Sarah from the bookstore. They fell silent, watching the scene unfold in the garden. "But most of all," Jack continued, now close enough to touch, "I want to see where this goes, because in just 2 days, you've made me feel more alive than I have in years." Clara couldn't hold back anymore. She launched herself forward, and Jack caught her in his strong arms, lifting her slightly off the ground as he held her close. His familiar scent of pine and wood smoke enveloped her. "Is this real?" she whispered against his shoulder. Jack's deep chuckle rumbled through his chest. "As real as those mountain trails we climbed." From the patio came the sound of applause. Clara looked over to see their small audience had grown. May was wiping tears from her eyes, and Sarah was beaming. Even Ryan stood at the edge of the crowd, a look of genuine happiness on his face. "Well, it's about time," May called out, making everyone laugh. Jack set Clara down gently but kept his arm around her waist. "I hope you don't mind an audience," he murmured. Clara smiled up at him, remembering how their story had begun in front of all these people. "I think we're used to it by now." "Clara Bennett," Jack said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "would you like to go on a proper date with me? No pretending this time?" The gathered crowd chuckled. Clara's heart felt so full it might burst. "Yes," she said firmly. "Yes to all of it." Jack's hand came up to cup her cheek, and then he was kissing her, not like their sunset kiss full of bittersweet goodbye, but with the promise of tomorrow and all the days after. The applause grew louder, accompanied by cheerful whistles. When they finally pulled apart, Clara saw nothing but joy and certainty in Jack's eyes. The fears that had haunted her for so long, of not being enough, of being left behind, seemed to melt away in the warmth of his gaze. "Welcome home," she whispered, and Jack's brilliant smile told her he understood exactly what she meant. May was already organizing an impromptu celebration on the patio, directing the venue staff to bring out more chairs. Sarah was on her phone, presumably calling others to share the news. In a small town like theirs, word would spread fast, but for once, Clara didn't mind being the center of attention. Hand in hand, they walked toward their waiting friends, both knowing that this wasn't an ending at all. It was a beginning, one they would write together, one day at a time. The evening air had grown cooler, but Clara felt nothing but warmth as she and Jack strolled hand in hand through the venue's garden paths. Fairy lights twinkled in the trees above them, creating a magical glow that matched the joy in her heart. "So tell me more about this watershed project," Clara said, squeezing his hand. The gravel crunched softly beneath their feet as they walked. Jack's face lit up with enthusiasm. "There's this whole network of streams feeding into the main river. The goal is to restore the natural flow patterns, help the wildlife thrive again." He gestured with his free hand as he spoke. "We'll be working with local schools too, teaching kids about conservation." "That sounds perfect for you," Clara smiled, thinking of how natural he was at explaining things. "And you'll really be able to stay here? Permanently?" "Already signed the preliminary paperwork on my phone," he chuckled. "My boss was surprisingly understanding. Said she'd been hoping I'd finally put down roots somewhere." They wandered beyond the venue's boundaries, following a worn path that led toward the surrounding hills. The stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, twinkling like diamonds scattered on velvet. "I keep thinking about all the places I want to show you," Jack said softly. "There's this hidden waterfall about 2 hours' hike from here, and a meadow that fills with wildflowers in the spring." Clara felt her heart swell. "I'd like that, all of it." She paused, then added with a small laugh, "Though you might need to be patient with me on some of those trails." "Hey, you did great on our first hike," Jack protested, pulling her closer. "Besides, half the joy is in taking our time, seeing things together." They stopped at the crest of a small hill, looking back at the venue where lights glowed warmly in the windows. Clara could see people moving inside, the wedding festivities continuing. But for the first time, watching those scenes of happiness didn't bring an ache to her heart. "You know what's strange?" she said, turning to face Jack. "When I first got Ryan's invitation, I thought coming here would be torture. But now—" She shook her head, smiling. "Now I'm actually grateful." Jack's eyes were soft in the twilight. "How so?" "Because if I hadn't come, I wouldn't have met you. And I wouldn't have realized how much stronger I've become." Clara looked back at the venue. "Seeing Ryan doesn't hurt anymore. That chapter of my life is truly over, and I'm okay with that." Jack wrapped his arms around her from behind, and they stood together, watching as more stars appeared in the deepening night sky. A cool breeze carried the scent of pine and late summer flowers. "You know what I thought when I first saw you at that reception?" Jack's voice was warm against her ear. "What's that?" "I thought, Now there's someone special. You had this quiet strength about you, even when you were sitting alone." His arms tightened slightly. "I'm glad I found the courage to walk over." Clara leaned back against him, feeling completely at peace. "Your timing was perfect. My knight in flannel armor," she teased. Their laughter mingled in the quiet evening air. In the distance, a whippoorwill called, its haunting song echoing across the hills. "Want to walk a bit further?" Jack asked. "There's a great spot to stargaze just ahead." Clara nodded, and they continued along the path, their steps naturally falling into sync. The path wound through a small grove of trees before opening onto a grassy clearing. Above them, the Milky Way stretched across the sky in a glittering band. "Oh, wow," Clara breathed, tilting her head back to take in the view. Jack spread his jacket on the grass, and they sat together, shoulders touching. The night was alive with cricket song and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. "I used to think being alone made me safer," Clara admitted quietly. "After the divorce, after Ryan, it seemed easier to just close myself off." Jack's hand found hers in the darkness. "I know that feeling well. But sitting here now, I realize how wrong I was." She turned to look at him, his features softly illuminated by starlight. "Sometimes the scariest choices lead to the best outcomes. Like accepting a stranger's help at a wedding?" Jack's smile was tender. "Exactly like that." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling his solid warmth. "Thank you for coming back. Thank you for giving me a reason to stay." Above them, a shooting star streaked across the sky, leaving a brief trail of light in its wake. Clara made a silent wish, though she realized she already had everything she'd been hoping for: trust, joy, and the courage to love again. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead, their joined hands a promise of all the adventures yet to come. As days turned into weeks, Clara and Jack's love story became a cherished part of the small town's fabric. On sunny afternoons, locals would spot them volunteering at the community garden, where Jack's expertise in forest restoration perfectly complemented Clara's newfound interest in growing things. "Look at these tomatoes," Clara called out one day, holding up a perfectly ripe specimen. She was kneeling in the dirt, her gardening gloves covered in soil, but her face glowed with satisfaction. "Remember when I said I couldn't keep a cactus alive?" Jack looked up from where he was installing a new irrigation system. "You've got a green thumb now, just needed the right teacher." "And the right motivation," Clara replied, glancing around at the thriving garden that helped supply the local food bank. Their shared commitment to community service had started small, just helping elderly Mrs. Peterson tend her yard, but had grown into something bigger. Together, they'd organized weekend nature walks for the school kids, combining Jack's outdoor expertise with Clara's gift for working with children. At the library where Clara worked, things had changed too. Gone was the quiet, reserved librarian who used to hide behind stacks of books. In her place was a confident woman who hosted animated reading circles and nature-themed storytelling sessions. "You're different these days," Margaret, her best friend, observed during their weekly coffee meetup at the local cafe. "You're practically glowing." Clara stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "I feel different, like I've finally found my place, you know?" Through the cafe window, she could see Jack across the street, helping Mr. Johnson fix his shop's awning. He caught her eye and waved, causing her heart to flutter just like it had that first night at the wedding. The townspeople had embraced their relationship wholeheartedly. Even Ryan, when he occasionally passed through town, could see the dramatic change in his ex-fiancée. The insecure woman he'd known was gone, replaced by someone who radiated joy and purpose. On weekends, Clara and Jack could often be found exploring the hiking trails around town. Clara, once hesitant about outdoor adventures, now eagerly planned their excursions. She'd learned to identify bird calls, spot animal tracks, and navigate using natural landmarks. "Remember how nervous you were on our first hike?" Jack asked one afternoon as they rested on a fallen log, sharing trail mix and water. Clara laughed, the sound echoing through the forest. "I was sure I'd make a fool of myself. Now look at me, planning our next camping trip." Their relationship had grown deeper with each passing day. They'd faced challenges together, like when a storm damaged the community center's roof, and they'd rallied the town to help repair it. Or when Clara's car broke down miles from town, and Jack taught her basic auto repair instead of just fixing it himself. "It's not about doing everything perfectly," he'd explained, holding the flashlight while she learned to change a tire. "It's about having the courage to try." That philosophy had become their shared mantra. Clara found herself taking on new challenges at work, suggesting innovative programs for the library, and even starting a nature book club that combined their shared interests. One crisp morning, as dawn painted the sky in soft pinks and purples, they set out for their favorite trail. The air was fresh with morning dew, and birds were just beginning their morning songs. Clara moved confidently along the path, her hiking boots finding sure footing on the rocky terrain. "Hard to believe this is the same trail that scared me half to death a few months ago," she said, pausing to help Jack document some native plants for his restoration project. "You were never scared," Jack corrected her, snapping a photo of a rare wildflower. "You just needed to believe in yourself as much as I believed in you." Clara smiled, remembering how far she'd come. The woman who'd received that wedding invitation months ago, dreading the thought of facing her past, seemed like a different person now. She'd found not just love, but a whole new way of living. As they climbed higher, the rising sun cast long shadows through the trees. Jack reached for her hand as they navigated a particularly steep section, though they both knew she was perfectly capable of managing it alone. Some gestures of care had simply become habits of love. They reached their favorite viewpoint just as the sun fully emerged above the horizon. The valley below was bathed in golden light, the town just beginning to stir to life. Clara could see the library where she'd spend the afternoon, the community garden where they'd work later, and all the familiar places that now held new meaning. "Beautiful morning," Jack said, wrapping an arm around her waist. Clara leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "Every morning is beautiful now," she replied, and meant it. The sun continued its ascent, promising another day of possibilities. Together, they watched the light spread across the valley, their shared silence full of contentment and understanding. In that moment, Clara felt the full measure of her transformation, from a woman who'd feared her own shadow to someone who embraced each new day as an adventure.